My boss fired me 11 days before my retirement bonus kicked in. 27 years at the same company, gone with one sentence and a smirk. No bonus for old folk, he said, handing me a severance deal. Sign by Friday or get nothing. I thanked him, calmly, and left the room. I didn't slam the door. I didn't raise my voice. I just walked out. But as I passed the glass walls of that conference room, I caught my reflection, the same man who had built half the systems this company still ran on, and I felt something shift. Not anger, not sadness, precision. My name is Jack Reynolds, 61 years old, systems engineer at Titan Logistics, based out of Chicago. I'd been there longer than most of the executives had been alive. I designed their tracking platforms, their warehouse automation protocols, their entire backbone of digital operations. I was the one they called when the lights went out. And yet, after 27 years, I was disposable. The man who fired me, Daniel Price, 41, new CEO, had been at the company less than a year. He came in talking about modernization, about streamlining old processes, which was corporate code for cutting salaries and boosting stock value before the next shareholder call. He didn't know what I knew about this company. He didn't even care. He just wanted numbers on a spreadsheet to look cleaner. When I got home, my wife, Karen, asked what happened. I told her the truth, that I was done. She waited for me to react, to curse, to rage, to crumble. But I didn't. Instead, I sat in my office, opened my old laptop, and started reviewing my archives. Every system I'd built, every decision I'd documented, every piece of data that could tell a story. Because Titan Logistics had a history, one that Daniel Price hadn't lived long enough to understand. But I had the records, the patterns, the buried details. At midnight, I made one phone call to someone I hadn't spoken to in years. His name was Robert Hale, a former board member forced out after he'd accused the company of hiding losses behind falsified software reports. He'd been right. They'd buried him for it. When he picked up, I said just 6 words. "Robert, it's Jack. You were right." And that was the moment everything started to turn. Robert Hale hadn't heard my voice in almost a decade, but he remembered it instantly. There was a long pause before he spoke. He said he knew this day would come, the day Titan finally turned on one of its own. His tone was steady, almost amused, like he'd been waiting for someone else to see what he saw years ago. I told him what happened, every word Daniel Price said, every file I'd kept. Robert listened without interrupting. Then he told me exactly what I already suspected. The company wasn't just cutting costs. It was hiding something. After he'd been forced out, Robert had stayed quiet, but he never stopped watching. He still had contacts, people inside the finance department, legal, IT. He said he could connect me with one of them, a woman named Lisa Moran. She'd been keeping her own files, too. Internal reports showing misappropriated funds buried under maintenance costs and software upgrades, the same systems I designed. They'd been using my code to disguise losses. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in front of my computer, going through backups I hadn't opened in years. Every system I'd ever built had audit trails, encrypted redundancies, proof of every transaction that passed through it. I didn't need to hack anything. The data was already mine. I'd created it, and I knew exactly where to look. The next morning, I drove to the office as if nothing had happened. Security scanned my badge without realizing it was still active. Daniel must have assumed IT had already disabled my access. They hadn't. Rookie mistake. I spent 3 hours on the lower server floor, downloading years of system logs onto a portable drive. Nobody noticed. Nobody ever looks at the quiet guy in the corner carrying a coffee cup and a flash drive. When I walked past Daniel's office on my way out, he didn't even glance up. He was too busy rehearsing for the quarterly meeting, bragging about efficiency initiatives that were going to make shareholders millions. I almost smiled. He had no idea that the same man he dismissed as obsolete was already holding the evidence that could dismantle him. By the time I got home, I had 47 gigabytes of records spanning 12 years. Buried among them were thousands of financial transactions that didn't add up. Someone had built a parallel network of accounts, and I was going to find out who. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. Because quiet men don't yell. They build systems that speak for them. The first anomaly appeared after midnight. I was in my home office, the glow from the monitors reflecting off a cold cup of coffee. I'd been combing through archived payroll ledgers, tracing software license payments that didn't match the installation logs. A name kept repeating, Horizon Data Partners. On paper, they were a consulting firm. In reality, they didn't exist. The listed address was a warehouse that had been vacant since 2014. Yet the company had received over $3 million in system maintenance payments, all approved under Daniel Price's digital signature. At first, I thought it was sloppy bookkeeping. Then I realized the brilliance of it. Daniel hadn't invented the scheme. It had been there long before him, small enough to stay invisible, hidden behind upgrades and IT costs. He just scaled it up. The system I'd built was so efficient that no one ever questioned its accuracy. It was a perfect crime buried in clean code. The next morning, Robert put me in touch with Lisa Moran. She worked in corporate finance and spoke like someone who'd spent years holding back the truth. She told me Daniel wasn't acting alone. Two other executives, the CFO, Mark Hanley, and the legal director, Susan Wells, had been running the financial side of the fraud. Their goal was simple: inflate the company's numbers, funnel excess maintenance funds through shell vendors, and cash out before the board caught on. Daniel's job was to clean house, fire senior employees, and blame outdated systems when the discrepancies eventually surfaced. People like me were the fall guys. I spent the next 3 days cross-referencing everything Lisa sent. Her spreadsheets matched my logs exactly. Every forged contract, every falsified invoice. Together, we mapped the entire operation. 8 shell companies, for fake consultants, and nearly $12 million moved off the books. But I wasn't ready to expose it yet. Not until I had something irrefutable, something that couldn't be buried, discredited, or spun as a mistake. I needed the full chain of evidence, from authorization to transaction. So I went back into the system one last time, quietly, using an old administrative key I'd written years ago. The company thought they'd retired it. They hadn't. And as I accessed the restricted audit server, I saw something that froze me. There were emails, thousands of them, archived under Daniel's name, and attached to several were PDF scans of contracts. One of them had my digital signature on it. I hadn't signed a single one. Seeing my own signature forged on those documents felt like a punch I never saw coming. The contracts authorized payments to Horizon Data Partners, millions approved under my name, dated months before Daniel even became CEO. Someone had built this scheme long ago, and I was the perfect cover. I was the loyal veteran, the steady hand. Nobody ever questioned my approvals. They'd used my identity as the foundation for their fraud, and now Daniel had fired me to clean up the evidence. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, trying to feel something other than the cold certainty of betrayal. Then I printed every file, every email, every forged contract, and backed up the data onto 3 encrypted drives. I locked one in my safe, mailed another to Robert, and hid the third somewhere no one would think to look. I wasn't going to make the mistake of trusting anyone with the only copy. Lisa called later that night. Her voice was low, uneasy. She said internal security had started auditing employee accounts, specifically mine. Daniel must have realized someone was digging. That meant I had hours, maybe days, before they shut down access entirely. I thanked her and told her to stay quiet. If she got caught helping me, they'd ruin her too. By dawn, I had everything I needed. Years of hidden transactions, board meeting minutes, falsified approvals, all of it traced to Daniel, Mark, and Susan. It wasn't just fraud anymore. It was corporate theft on a federal level. But I didn't plan to call the police yet. That would only warn them. I needed one decisive move, something they couldn't control or bury. At 8 a.m., Daniel called my cell. I let it ring twice before answering. He didn't waste time pretending. He said the company was reviewing serious breaches of confidentiality under my credentials. He sounded confident, rehearsed, like a man reading lines from a script written to destroy me. I said nothing until he finished. Then I told him I understood completely, thanked him for calling, and hung up. He thought I was defeated. But what he didn't know was that his words were being recorded. The timestamp, the tone, the implication, it was all evidence. By that afternoon, I had one final thing to do. Not revenge, resolution. And it started with a single, devastating email. I drafted the email like a man disarming a bomb, slowly, precisely, without emotion. It was addressed to Titan's entire board of directors, with copies to the SEC, and a journalist I trusted at the Chicago Tribune. The subject line was simple: unauthorized financial activity, immediate board review required. I didn't accuse anyone directly. I didn't need to. The attachments spoke for themselves: internal ledgers, contracts with my forged signature, and Daniel's authorization trail linking every shell company. Facts are louder than fury. Before hitting send, I checked every header, every timestamp, every digital fingerprint. My systems were clean. They wouldn't trace this back to a disgruntled employee seeking revenge. It would look like what it truly was: a whistleblower's report. I hit send at 7:59 a.m., just before the markets opened. Then I went quiet. No posts, no calls, no reaction. The silence was part of the plan. By noon, the story had exploded inside the company. Robert texted first. "They're panicking." Lisa confirmed that executives were being called into emergency meetings. Daniel must have realized within minutes that the data came from me. But by then, the email had already reached the Tribune. The headline went live before lunch. By 3 p.m., Titan stock was down 12%. Reporters camped outside headquarters. Employees whispered in hallways. The board announced a temporary internal audit, which meant only one thing: they were cornered. That evening, Daniel called again. This time, his tone was different. No arrogance, just fear hidden behind corporate calm. He said the company wanted to resolve this quietly, to avoid damage to reputation and retirement benefits. He even mentioned a new offer if I agreed to retract the data. I let him talk until he ran out of words, then said only one thing: the truth doesn't need a deal. I ended the call. The next morning, Lisa forwarded me a memo she wasn't supposed to see. The board had suspended Daniel, Mark, and Susan pending investigation. They'd brought in an outside firm to audit every transaction from the past 10 years. The silence I'd built had become unstoppable momentum. And just like that, the company that tried to erase me was now being forced to remember exactly who built its foundation. They wanted me forgotten. Instead, they made me unforgettable. The following week unfolded like a storm that no one could stop. Titan Logistics went from boasting record growth to full-scale crisis in 72 hours. The board announced an independent investigation. Investors started pulling out, and the Chicago Tribune ran a second article exposing deeper inconsistencies in the company's financial records. Every system I'd built, every audit trail I'd once guarded, had now become their undoing. Robert called me daily, keeping me informed. He said half the executive floor was on administrative leave, which was corporate language for damage control. The SEC had already requested copies of the internal ledgers, and forensic accountants were combing through the data I'd sent. My email had triggered a chain reaction too big for anyone to contain. Daniel Price's career was effectively over, but I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't built for revenge. I was built for order, for truth. And now that truth had a paper trail. On Friday, I received a letter delivered by courier, no email, no calls. It was from Titan's legal department. They invited me to cooperate with the investigation, claiming I was a key witness in helping uncover potential misconduct. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same company that had thrown me out like broken hardware now needed me to help them clean up their mess. Graceful silence has a strange way of turning into authority. Lisa texted that afternoon. The board had started questioning her department, and she'd been instructed not to delete or alter any files. She was nervous, but I told her to hold steady. Once auditors arrived, her honesty would protect her. They'd need someone credible to confirm my evidence, and she was that person. That night, I sat on my porch with a glass of scotch, watching the sky burn orange over the lake. Karen came outside, wrapped in a blanket. She hadn't asked for details since the day it started. She didn't need to. She just said, "Did they finally see it?" I nodded. "They're starting to," I told her. The company that believed it could erase me had learned something I already knew. Systems don't forget. The data never lies. And when truth finally surfaces, it doesn't whisper. It detonates quietly, like a charge planted years in advance. And I had just lit the fuse. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in a conference room at Titan headquarters for the first time since being fired. The irony wasn't lost on me. Same glass walls, same polished table, but now I wasn't the one being dismissed. I was the one they needed. The board had called me in for questioning, to assist with internal clarification. Grace, the company's senior counsel, tried to keep her voice neutral, but I could hear the tension underneath. Every executive in that room understood what I'd done, and more importantly, what I could still do. They began carefully. Questions about system design, authorization access, transaction protocols. I answered precisely, no emotion, no elaboration. Facts only. I described how the system logged signatures, how audit trails couldn't be altered without leaving digital fingerprints, how Daniel Price had used an executive override that should have been approved by two people, one of whom was the CFO. Grace wrote notes furiously, while the board members exchanged glances. I could see it in their faces. The structure they'd trusted was collapsing, one line of code at a time. When the meeting ended, they thanked me for my cooperation. I simply nodded and walked out. But as I reached the elevator, one of the older board members, a man named Alan Brooks, caught up with me. He said quietly that if half of what I'd shown them was true, Daniel and his team wouldn't just lose their jobs. They'd lose everything. Then he asked why I'd done it. I told him the truth. I didn't do it to destroy them. I did it to stop them. That night, Robert called again. He said the Tribune was preparing a follow-up article, this time naming names. Daniel, the CFO, and the legal director were all officially under federal investigation for corporate fraud and falsification of records. Titan's shares had dropped another 12%, but the board wasn't panicking anymore. They were reorganizing, preparing to rebuild under new leadership. Before we hung up, Robert said something that stuck with me. You didn't burn the bridge, Jack. You rebuilt it, stronger. I sat there in silence for a long time after that call. The truth is, I hadn't meant to rebuild anything. I'd only wanted to end it cleanly. But sometimes endings have a way of turning into beginnings. And for the first time in years, the company I built from the ground up was finally standing on solid ground again, because I'd made sure of it. The investigation stretched into months. Federal auditors tore through Titan's files, uncovering a decade's worth of hidden discrepancies. What I had exposed was only the beginning. Beneath Daniel's layer of fraud were older systems of manipulation, quiet transfers, false vendor accounts, and internal bonuses approved by long-gone executives. The company hadn't just been bleeding money. It had been built on the illusion of stability. I had spent years maintaining that illusion without realizing it. Every week, someone new was suspended or quietly escorted out. The CFO, Mark Hanley, resigned before charges were filed. Susan Wells, the legal director, tried to cut a deal but only succeeded in implicating herself further. And Daniel, the man who fired me, vanished from public view. No statements, no appearances, not even a denial. His career had ended in silence, the same way he'd tried to end mine. Lisa stayed in touch, cautiously. She'd kept her job, but was now assisting the auditors directly. She told me the board was planning a full restructure, including a new compliance division. They'd even begun consulting with outside experts to redesign Titan's systems from scratch. The irony made me smile. They were trying to fix the same foundation I'd warned them about years ago, the one they'd ignored because it wasn't flashy enough for shareholders. One night, around midnight, I logged into the old server one last time. My access had technically been revoked, but an emergency admin key still worked, a remnant no one else knew existed. The system was quiet, running clean for once. No false entries, no shadow vendors. I scrolled through the logs and saw the new encryption protocols going into place. It was strange, almost peaceful, watching my work finally evolve into what it was always meant to be: transparent, unbreakable, accountable. When I logged off, I felt something I hadn't felt since before all this started: closure. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need recognition. I'd already won in the only way that mattered. The following morning, Robert called. He said the board wanted to meet again, privately. They want to make you an offer, he said. I didn't answer right away. I just stared out the window at the rising sun and thought, after 27 years of silence, maybe it was finally time to speak again, on my own terms. The meeting was held in a smaller boardroom this time. No cameras, no press, just 4 members who'd survived the cleanup. The air was different, no arrogance, no pretense. They looked tired, humbled. The chairman, Alan Brooks, spoke first. He thanked me for what I'd done, though I could tell the words weren't easy. Men like him weren't used to admitting the company had nearly collapsed under their watch. He said Titan Logistics had been given a second chance, cleaner, leaner, rebuilt on honesty. Then he offered me something I hadn't expected. They wanted me to return, not as an engineer or consultant, but as the new Chief Information Integrity Officer, a position that didn't exist before. Direct reporting line to the board. Full oversight of every system, every audit, every transaction. I'd have authority to approve or shut down any process I found suspicious. No bureaucracy, no middlemen. I listened quietly, then asked one question: why me? Alan leaned forward and said, because you built the machine, and because you never raised your voice while you took it back. I didn't answer right away. I thought about the years I'd given this company, the weekends spent under fluorescent light, the deadlines that stole birthdays, the people I'd trained who now worked under younger, louder leaders. For most of my life, I'd defined success by loyalty. But loyalty, I'd learned, doesn't mean silence. It means standing firm when truth is on the line. After a long pause, I told them I'd think about it. They nodded. They understood. On my way out, Alan said, almost to himself, "It's strange, isn't it? How the quiet ones always end up rewriting the story." That night, I went home and told Karen about the offer. She smiled faintly, then asked if I trusted them again. I said I didn't need to. Trust isn't required when you finally hold the code to the entire system. I spent that night sitting in my study, looking over my old notes, diagrams, fragments of code I'd written 20 years ago. I realized I'd spent half my life keeping other people's systems running. Maybe it was time to build one for myself, something that couldn't be corrupted, replaced, or silenced. And if I went back, it wouldn't be as an employee. It would be as the architect of their redemption. I took the weekend before giving my answer. 2 days of silence, no phone calls, no emails, no distractions. I walked along the lake in the early mornings, the same path I used to take before work, back when I believed hard work alone could protect you. The city felt different now, colder, quieter, sharper. By Sunday evening, I'd made up my mind. On Monday, I met Alan Brooks at the headquarters. The building looked the same from the outside, but the energy inside had shifted. The arrogance was gone, replaced with something closer to fear and maybe respect. When I entered the boardroom, Alan stood and extended his hand. I didn't take it right away. I placed a single folder on the table instead. Inside was a written list of conditions. No contract, no signatures yet, just terms. I told him I would return only under 3 guarantees: full transparency over every department, independent audit authority, and the right to resign publicly if the board ever interfered with an investigation. Alan read each line carefully, then looked up and said, "Agreed." He didn't even try to negotiate. That told me everything I needed to know. They were desperate, and they were ready to change. The announcement went public the next morning. The press called it a redemption story. They said Titan Logistics had brought back its veteran engineer to lead the company into a new era of accountability. It sounded good in headlines, but that wasn't the real story. The truth was simpler. I hadn't come back to rebuild their empire. I came back to make sure no one like Daniel Price would ever rise inside it again. 6 months later, Titan was stable. The fraud cases were still moving through the courts, and the executives responsible were facing federal charges. I sat in my new office, smaller, simpler, overlooking the city I'd spent my life building systems for. Karen came by one afternoon, bringing coffee. She asked if I felt satisfied. I told her satisfaction wasn't the right word. Peace was. When she left, I closed the blinds and looked out over the skyline. The company I'd given half my life to had tried to erase me. Instead, I'd written myself into its foundation. And as the sun fell behind the buildings, I thought about all the noise Daniel used to make. The speeches, the arrogance, the laughter. All gone now. Replaced by something stronger. Silence. The kind that doesn't need to explain itself. The kind that lasts. Drop it in the comments. Hit subscribe. This is where we talk about what doesn't get forgiven.